My name is Rebecca. I am the Director of Training and Strategy for Youth Ministry Consultants. We are a nonprofit organization that works to equip, resource, and coach specifically small church leaders. And so we know there's a ton of incredible resources available to you. We seek to be the organization that works within your budget, within your time. We know that the demands on a small church leader are unique. And so we want to serve you well in that space. We're excited to host things like this every month, conversations designed to help you be more effective in ministry, to face moments like this with the tools and resources to handle it well. I'm excited to introduce Kayla. She's a family life pastor in Colorado. She's also a foster and adoptive and biological mom. She's had extensive training both in ministry and in parenting and leading kids who come from hard backgrounds. And so this conversation feels so appropriate because we have all had those weeks, those seasons where you show up to programming and that one kid walks in the door and you just know the night's going to go differently, because that child or that student is here, and we know that those kids matter to God. And even though they present somewhat of a challenge to us, we know that ministry to them matters, and we want to live in that space well. And so Kayla is here to tell us a little bit more about why some of those kids present challenging behaviors and what we can do to really lead them well and care for them well. So Kayla, I will hand it off to you. Thank you for being here.
I am by no means an expert, so just take it all with a grain of salt. I fell into this. I fell into ministry, also fell into working with difficult kids. So I'm not an expert, but I will share all of the information that I've learned. Some of the things we're going to talk about could be an entire day's worth of conversation. So I have just put together some resources, some things to like touch on topics, and we can get down to like actual tangible things that you can use today if you have program tonight or on Sunday, whatever. But really, I want to equip you guys to know where to look and how to find things and what keywords to be looking for that might help you in your own research. So yeah, let's just hop into it. Rebecca's doing my slideshow because I couldn't open it up. So
I just put in the chat, we'll do Q&A at the end. So keep questions in mind, scenarios you want to talk through, anything that would be helpful.
Yeah. So I subtitled this, How to See Them, Love Them, and Serve Them. You can go to the next one, but I feel like the biggest thing we can do is see them and understand them. Once kids feel seen, we all know this, at any age, the walls go down and we can be more effective. So this is just ways that we can see these difficult kids, we can love them, and we can know them better. These are the things we're going to cover. We're going to talk about all kids come with a story. We're going to talk about how this next generation matters. And we're going to talk about how the world is different than it used to be. And then I'm going to give you practical ways to love the parent, love the child, ask the right questions, and do the work to understand. So, all right. One of the biggest things right now that we're facing is you see a kid come in, and I put up in the corner a story. We noticed that Levi, and I'm actually modeling him off of my own personal son, loses self-control during transitions in VBS. Standing in line is hard for him. He kicks other kids. He doesn't know what to do with his body. And all of us want to say, why are you doing that? Why are you acting the way that you're acting? Like, I feel like I have asked I asked my 12-year-old, why are you acting the way that you're acting? Like, what are you doing? And I feel like we as leaders, we as pastors, we as people who act in love first, need to shift this question from why are you doing that to what happened? And it's just a more curious way of figuring out these kids and the story that they're coming with. So instead of focusing on the behavior, You're focusing on what has led them to this point. So what has happened to Levi in this transition? Maybe he's overwhelmed. Maybe he's overstimulated. Maybe he's nervous in this transition because he's in line, but he doesn't know what's next. So there's all of these things. Instead of why are you acting in this way, it's what's happening to cause this behavior. So as we go through this, I just want that to be your main question that you're asking yourself as you're thinking about that kid that's really difficult, as you're picturing that family that you might hope is on vacation or has soccer every Sunday. Think about what happened to get to this point where this child is acting out in this way. We want to take the time to ask the right questions, observe, and listen. So one of the things we're going to talk about a lot is the ACE scores. ACE scores is something that came out in the early 2000s after one of the largest mental health studies in our nation, done by, I think, Texas Christian University was the first one to do the ACE scores. And this is just adverse childhood experiences. There's 10 different types that we're going to learn about, types of trauma that kids can feel. And honestly, you're going to go through this and you're going to be like, oh, that's actually me, or my husband, or whatever. And this is just going to help us understand why kids, teens, adults, everybody could behave the way that they behave. And so this is going to help us focus on that question, what happened to you? I also say in this that trauma should be normalized. I know that there's so many other things in the world that causes kids to be difficult, but trauma is something that we don't talk about enough, or we downplay in kids' stories. So I just put the definition of trauma. It's the result from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects to the individual's functioning, mental health, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Okay, trauma could be a one-time thing that has this lasting effect on our whole person. That's kind of a big deal. And I feel like that's something that hasn't been focused on, especially in the church world, but we definitely need to be more aware of those things. So you can go to the next one, Rebecca. So we're going to talk about the ACE scores. The ACE scores have 10 things that could lead to them. So there's 10 types of childhood trauma, each one experienced at a point. The higher the ACE score, the higher the risk of chronic illness, generational trauma, and hard relationships. I put a little asterisk at the bottom here that in our post-COVID world, the increase of poor mental health, divorce, and neglect has skyrocketed. And I think we're all aware of that. So think about yourself, think about one of the kids that you're working with, a teenager, whoever, even a volunteer. It could be someone within your ministry that's trying to help. That could be a difficult person. These 10 things all lead up and write the story of who they are. So abuse can be physical, emotional, or sexual. Neglect can be physical or emotional. Mental illness or household dysfunctions could be mental illness, an incarcerated parent, a mother treated violently or really just poorly, substance abuse, or divorce. When you're thinking about this, how many kids do you know that are affected by one or more of these things? I would say a lot. When we're thinking about neglect, I think we also need to shift our perspective of parents are working more. Parents are maybe having hobbies more than they once did. Parents are distracted more than they once were. So we can think about neglect or emotional or physical neglect in the parent who's on their phone all day, or the parent who just started working from home during COVID and can't seem to put their laptop away. So I want to shift these things to like, these things don't have to be a huge life event like physical abuse or, being left locked in their room for days upon end. For each child, for each brain, these things can happen on a spectrum, and all of these things matter and add up. So I know that when I look at this list, and I grew up really great, my family's wonderful, but I was affected by maybe some neglect, honestly, mental illness, and substance abuse. I can see all of those things in my story. And I had a really, really great life. So picture all of those kids and adults and students and volunteers that you work with and the lives that they're leading up to. You can go to the next one, Rebecca. Too far. Okay. From these traumas, there are behavior links to it. So the study uncovered a stunning link between childhood trauma and chronic disease developed as adults, as well as social emotional problems. So this chart on the left, if you have a score of 3 or more of those ACEs, you are more likely to have any number of these things. A lack of physical activity, so obesity in our country is huge. Smoking, alcohol, drug use, all of that is self-coping mechanisms for the trauma that they may have faced. Missed work. Do we know anybody with a low work ethic? Is that because they're lazy, or is that because something happened? Just a question to ask. Physical and mental health, obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, which just shows, lack of good relational structure, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones. All of these things are connected back to childhood trauma. And childhood, if we think about it, is birth to 18. Those are the formative years, and that's where the most trauma can happen. So how's this played out in our kids? I think we just need to remember to ask ourselves, I wonder what happened. The next generation matters. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. If you didn't agree with this, then you wouldn't be here. But I think when we are faced with hard kids, it's hard to remember that they also matter and they are a child of God. And what has happened in the generations before them might be affecting them, but they have the power to change, and they have the power to break those curses, to feel the love, to just transform their life for the lives of their generations to come. So I just put a couple scriptures here because I really do believe that that we affect the generations after us, and we are also affected by the generations before us. So I'll just start Psalm 145:4. Our generation shall command your works to one another and shall declare your mighty acts. I think sometimes we downplay the impact that one child can have if we help see them and love them and know them. Psalm 102:18. Let this be recorded for a generation to come so that people yet to be created may praise the Lord. There's studies I'm not going to go into, but talk about in utero and what happens to kids in utero. A fetus can feel the stress of the mother carrying it. So picture a mom homeless on the streets. She's constantly in survival mode while she's pregnant. That is the only feeling and emotion that baby knows. So that baby's probably going to be born with heightened sense of survival and stress and feeding off of that energy from their mom the entire gestation period. It's huge. Luke 150 says, and his mercy is for those who fear him and from generation to generation. Just the same thing. We can look at one kid, we can look at one person, and we can imagine the generations before them and the trauma or good things or bad things or whatever has been brought from them. But we can also look at this one kid and we can see the hope for the generations to come. You can go to the next one. So the world is different today. And I think we all feel it. We've probably all asked the question, like, are there more kids on the spectrum? Are there more kids diagnosed with ADHD than when I was a kid? Yes, The answer is yes. And there can be a gamut for reasons for that. It could be our food. It could be just the way that we live our lives. It could be parenting. It could be so many things. But I think that these are all things we need to be aware of. So I just noted the main 3 things that I feel the world is different today. So there are more kids on the autism spectrum than there ever have been. There are studies being done as to why. Trauma is one of those. Family environment is a huge thing. Biology is a huge thing. And also food and school structure and what we're expecting of kids can highlight them on the spectrum in some way that may not have highlighted generations past. So if you look at this, 1 in 36 kids is identified with autism. So if you have 100 kids in your ministry on a Sunday morning, you're going to see 2 to 3 kids who have been identified with autism. That's not even counting the ones that the parents are still like, I don't know, they're just kind of wild, or I don't understand them, or they're delayed. That's not even counting those kids. So I think for us to know that that's happening and be aware, we can look at those kids differently and look at our groups differently too. And we'll talk about ways that you can tangibly help those kids also. There are more kids diagnosed with ADD and ADHD than there were before. This happens generally between the ages of 3 to 6 is when a child can be diagnosed. So for those of you in children's ministry, you might have a squirrely kid that doesn't have an official diagnosis, and you're thinking, something's kind of off here. I wonder what's happening. Instead of, why are you the way that you are? Keep asking the question, what is happening? Because this family might not actually know yet from the age of 6 or 3 to 6 what's happening in their child's brain. There's so much changing. Kids generally get diagnosed around 7. And how a family decides to deal with that diagnosis is always different. You have your families who are like, yes, let's go on the meds. You have your families who are like, no, let's change diet. Or you have your families who actually just are so overwhelmed, they don't even want to talk about it. So I think that ADHD and ADD is huge. There's been a 42% increase in diagnosis over the last 8 years. 42, that's almost 50%. That's almost half of what it was before. That's crazy. Social media, cell phone, all of that adding to depression and anxiety. We see this in teens, but if you look, kids are getting cell phones earlier. My 9-year-old tells me that his friends all have cell phones at 9 years old. So that means you get a cell phone, you're going to be on it, you're going to be texting, you're going to be wanting social media or sneaking social media or whatever it's going to be. And all of that plays into a child's development and their traumas. So picture a kid who's already feeling alone, who's already feeling outside of themselves, and they get a phone and all of these things they're feeling. Here it says cyberbullying. It says offensive name calling, spreading of false rumors, receiving explicit images or being asked for some, constant asking of where they are, what they're doing. Can you imagine the pressure that they're feeling to keep up with all of their friends at that age when they can hardly keep up with themselves and their own emotions? Physical threats, having explicit images of them shared without their consent. All of those things are really scary for me as an adult and as a parent. But for a child in that situation, whose brain is not fully developed, who does not know how to cope with those things or have the skills to talk about them, of course, that's going to affect their depression, anxiety, and ultimately their behavior in social situations. You can go to the next one. So now we're going to go into the how. We know the problem. Now what do we do? Because honestly, you look at all those things and you're like, okay, well, what the heck am I supposed to do? That's everything is fighting against us. Well, yeah, it is. So how do we start this? What do we do? And I want you guys to not feel overwhelmed, but feel this as baby steps. Just take one tangible thing. When you're picturing that kid or that family, just take one thing from this that you can do. So caring for kids really does start and end at home. So we get to see them for an hour, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours a week. That's not very much time for us to love them. So we need to love the parent. As professionals, we need to consider how we treat, talk, care for the parent of the difficult child. I think honestly, you guys, as pastors, this is going to make the hugest difference in how they see church, how they see people, how they see interaction, and honestly, if it's a safe place for their whole family. So I have some do's and some don'ts. So the do's when loving the parent is support with words of encouragement. Whenever you see them, if you see on Facebook, if you see on Instagram, if you see them in person and they post something about their child who's difficult and people know is difficult, maybe you chime in with something that is good, or you say, way to go, mom, or love that, dad, or whatever it's going to be. Chime in with encouragement and good things that you see in that family. Ask better questions about how you can understand the child. I, as a mom with a difficult child, when someone tells or asks me, how can I better serve him? Or what's going to work in this scenario? Or what's working at home? That makes all the difference than me just picking them up at school and hearing all of the terrible things that happened. Ask the question, how can I understand your child better? Also, share the ways you see the child doing well and growing. Chances are the parents already know the ways that they're difficult, but to hear from someone else how you see them growing and doing well, it's going to be a game changer for the parents to feel seen and safe. Connect parents with other parents. This is huge. So as pastors, as professionals, we interact with so many more people than the average parent does. So if you hear a story of, oh yeah, the Maxies are having a difficult time with Levi, but I also know that there's this other family in the church or in the community or wherever that is going through the same thing, connect them. It can be a really lonely place to be the parent of a difficult child. And offer to help outside of church environments. Sometimes I think we're like, okay, I did my hour. He was in Sunday school. Great, done, check. No, that's not enough for the parents. In order for the parents to trust us and to know that we see them, love them, and care for them, we need to reach out. We need to say, can I take your kid to a movie? Could I go to the park with them? Do you need a break? Because chances are these parents are going to need a break. If I need a break after 1 hour of Sunday school with this child, imagine what the parents are feeling at the end of a long day. Now we're going to go into the don'ts. Please don't tell a parent all the ways that their kids are hard. They know, they already know the way that their kids are hard. So at pickup, don't say, oh, he didn't participate. He was kicking, he was hitting. Yes, there's a space for structure and following the rules and working on those things. That should happen one-on-one across a table. That doesn't need to be at the pickup. But please don't just list all the ways that their kids are hard because they already know and they don't need to hear that. Please don't focus on the bad behavior. Once again, we know the bad behaviors. Parents generally can know and imagine the bad behaviors. Every time my phone rings and it's the school, I just imagine someone did something bad. I don't imagine, oh, it's a great call. Something good is happening. So don't focus on the bad behavior because that's a battle that I'm sure they're fighting themselves, is only focusing on the bad. Also, don't share the child's story. It's not yours to tell. So we talked about every child brings a story. Yes, to help understand them, you should know bits and pieces of that story if the parent feels safe to tell you. But once you have that story, hold it close because it's not yours to tell. It's not yours to tell other leaders. It's not yours to tell other students. It is simply yours to pray for the child, understand the child better, and reshape how your trying to effectively minister and love that child. Don't avoid the parent. I feel like sometimes we think, let's just get through this lock-in and then we can be done and the kid had fun and we don't need to talk about it. Also, don't avoid the parent. We need to be partners with parents. We need to be the ones that are walking alongside them in this difficult journey with their difficult child. Let's not avoid it. Also, please don't give parenting advice unless it's asked for. Sometimes you have a parenting class or whatever at your church. That will be a space where they're inviting that advice in. But don't just offer it unless they've asked for it, because that's how we build up walls between us and the parents. I think those things are easy. I think we cannot do those things. And if you feel yourself going there, take a step back, ask the Holy Spirit, guide my heart in how to interact with this parent today. How do I communicate? How do I communicate the hard things? How do I communicate the good things? Because we have that intervener and we get to do that. You can go to the next one. All right, ask the right questions. We should always be curious, which you guys are here clearly because you're curious and you want to know what's happening. Asking the right questions helps us create a space that's not only safe for the child, but safe for the parents. It can be a really shaming thing to be the child or the parent of a difficult child. And if they don't feel supported by you, they're probably not going to bring their child back to your organization or ministry. So we need to create a safe, clear, confident space for them. And that's going to happen when we're just curious in how to love and how to respond. So some questions to ask could be, what might help me better understand your child? Pretty easy. Or do you have any resources for me to learn about your child's history or how to see them better? Thank God for the internet. There are YouTube videos, there's everything that we need that we can share with each other or that we as parents can share with professionals on, this is actually going to help you understand my son's brain, or this is going to help you understand why they do what they do. Another question, how can we as an organization better partner with your family? This is us showing the parent that we see them as a whole. We don't just see their child, or we don't just see them. We see them as a whole unit. I understand that you're going to have some kids in youth group or church or whatever that parents aren't involved, and that's okay. Then you ask the kid, how can I better support you or partner with you? I see this is hard for you. I'm glad you're here. Is there something that we could do differently to help you not feel stressed out or whatever it might be? Have you learned any tricks that might help us when interacting with your child? You can also ask a teen that. Are there any tricks that you've used to help you focus in class, at school, or at home? Are there things that your child has a negative response to that we should avoid? Sometimes these kids, it's noise, it's people, it's lights. And we create this environment, especially in children and youth ministry, that's fun and engaging and over the top sometimes. That might be too much. It might be a child who needs to sit outside during worship. It might be a child who needs to avoid certain foods during snack time. There are a lot of things that could have a negative response that you could easily help the child avoid. Go to the next one. Okay, we also need to do the work to understand. I think as professionals, we should constantly be learning. We will never master something. I am sure of that. And so I kind of made this chart here to help us know what could make a child difficult. So we already talked about a few things, biological factors. So that could be a biological disorder in the brain. It could just be some sort of hormone imbalance that they're experiencing at that time. It could be a whole host of things. And I have an article on the next page that lists all of the things that could be a biological factor in children and adolescents. It could be trauma. And we talked about the ACE scores. We talked about all of the different ways that childhood trauma affects a child. The impacts of the world. We talked about social media. We talked about all of the cell phone pressure and all that stuff that the kids just are constantly inputting. Something happening at home. It could be dad lost his job, or something as maybe simple as we put my dog down. That's difficult. Everything is big for kids, and we want to meet them in that space. So what's happening at home that could be making this child difficult right now? Lack of support. I think this goes back to parents being busy, parents being distracted, children feeling alone. So how we learn, I have an article for you guys about the biological factor. We have a video on understanding trauma, and Rebecca's going to try to play it, but if you can't hear it, let us know. So if you can hear it, give us a thumbs up. If you can't, then we won't play it.
Is it on the next one?
No, it's just the link. So go back. So it should just, yeah, click that. Give us a thumbs up if you can hear it.
But not sure whether it's worth it for your home? Well, before you get close.
Can everybody hear it?
As we develop, our brain produces 250,000 neurons every minute. By birth, we'll have 100 billion of these miraculous building blocks. But in order for our brains to fully function, we'll need synaptic connections to organize and build networks. Who we become and how we function depends entirely on how these networks develop, and our interactions with others and how we've been treated determines everything. From functions like heart rate, breathing, and basic emotions, to personality, decision-making, language, social behavior, and voluntary movement. We know that severe or prolonged abuse or neglect derails that building process, even in the womb. Distress and high anxiety in the mother allows cortisol, the stress hormone, to cross the placenta and disrupt development. When the toxic stress response is activated repeatedly, brain development and even immune systems are disrupted. Research has shown that high doses of stress hormones inhibit brain function and impulse control, overbuilding the fear center and the part of the brain that's critical to emotional regulation. TBRI uses 3 sets of principles to begin the healing caused by toxic stress. By recreating the developmental process, TBRI strives to introduce the nurturing that was absent in those toxic situations. And for the child who has endured toxic stress, healing must begin with a sense of both physical and emotional safety, something this child may have never known. Connecting principles are designed to create and nurture healthy relationships through sensitivity, consistency, and availability to disarm fear and gain trust. Giving full attention, using a gentle voice and kind facial expressions and body language are just a few of the ways to help build trust. Punitive and controlling responses only feed a child's mistrust and fear. Empowering principles are designed to meet physical needs, including sensory regulation, nutrition, and hydration, and strive to be aware of environmental issues, such as overstimulation by light, noise, or smells that can trigger behaviors that often leave caretakers baffled. The goal of the correcting principles is to help guide a child through day-to-day strategies by correcting fear-based behaviors and establishing felt safety, helping a child regulate their emotions, tell their stories, and learn through playful engagement. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study examined the effects of multiple types of abuse in childhood, and the staggering results showed that high doses of childhood adversity affect brain development drastically, leading to addictions, attempts at self-medication, impacted immune systems, chronic inflammation, and autoimmune diseases. The greater the number of traumatic events, the greater the damage. TBRI can help stop this ugly cycle. There is hope for the damaging effects of toxic stress, but it will take dedication, education, and most of all, understanding.
So there's a ton of resources on understanding trauma. If this is something that you guys have a specific child in your ministry or family, or even if you have a family that is seeking to start fostering or adopting or goes through a hard thing. We had a family at our church about a year ago who the father died. That's trauma. That's huge for those kids. And there's a 5th grader and an 8th grader in that family. So how are we understanding what's happening inside their brains and during that trauma? The social media effects, that's just an article, but you guys can find that all over. We all know the negative effects of social media. What's happening at home? How we learn that is we just create safe space to listen. One of my favorite things is my daughter will like invite all these friends to youth group. And when we're in the car, those girls are captive and they are talking and they're experiencing things and talking about things that I don't think they would talk about in a bigger group environment. So create a safe space where these kids might actually tell you what's happening at home. Or that might just be pulling them aside and being like, hey, you're kind of acting different today. What happened? Did something happen at school? Is something going on at home? Just creating that safe space to listen. Lack of support. This is where we really want to go outside of the organization. So tangible things to do. Uh-oh. My computer went away.
Do you want me to go through this?
Yeah. I don't know where it went. I got a phone call and denied it, and then it went away.
So some tangible things to do. Embrace who they are. Let them be themselves. We don't want to shame kids. We don't want to put them down. We don't want them to feel different because they present differently. Just embrace them for who they are and let them be themselves. You can also give them a buddy. This is really helpful, especially if you have a middle schooler who has challenging behavior. Maybe you have a high school senior that is patient and understanding, that can just hang with that kid. And if they need to go walk the halls when it's loud, they can do that. If they learn better when they're moving around, it's a way to keep that middle schooler safe and embrace those unique challenges. Have fidgets, have things for them to do with their hands. My husband's a middle school teacher. He has a calm down corner that has fidgets, that has a bubble thing to watch, things that help them regulate their emotions. Provide a quiet space, especially if your programming is loud, if there's loud music, if there's crazy games, if it's really stimulating, which is really fun for a lot of kids. But make sure you're also thinking of these kids that overwhelms them, that overwhelms their processing, their regulatory skills, and make sure there's a space designated that's still fun. Maybe there's games, maybe there's a leader hanging out that's ready to just be with them in this quiet space. Snacks.
I'd like to speak into snacks. Yeah, I'm good. I got it. Snacks is actually huge for kids who are feeling dysregulated or overwhelmed. I know at, youth group or programming, we offer all of the, fruit snacks and candies and all that stuff, which is so fun. But if you give a child whose blood sugar is low because of their cortisol levels are different, if you give them a snack, a high protein, high fat snack, think beef jerky, that is going to kind of reset their brain. Also, it'll make them breathe. So what happens when we're chewing? We're breathing out of our nose. Also, you can get drinks with straws. This is something that I would have never thought about. But if you get a drink for a child, just a cup of water, have them drink it out of a straw if they're all wound up, instead of drinking out of a cup normally. Because when you have kids or students or people, adults, drink out of a straw, it causes them to breathe. And they don't even know that it's happening. You're like tricking them into being calm. So I feel like those things are very tangible ways that we can help kids who are dysregulated or wild or feeling their trauma in that moment. Social media effects: lead with love first. I think it's easy for us to say, just get off that. Don't have that. Don't worry about what that girl said. Don't send that picture. It's easy for us to lead with that instead of, oh my gosh, yeah, social media is kind of fun, isn't it? Like, I like it. And lead with that of, I can see how this hurts. Instead of just trying to solve the problem, lead with it. And have a list of external resources. So if you have a child, because of social media, who has gone into depression, anxiety, eating disorder, all of those things, we are not equipped for that. And I think that we need to know our limits, and we need to know when this child or this person needs to go see a medical professional, a counselor, therapist, whatever those things might be. But if you're not equipped with that list in your neighborhood, in your city, then you won't know how to address that issue with them. So I think just having that external list is going to be huge. Something happening at home, assign them a one-on-one leader. I don't know how your programs are set up, but do you have someone who can be the floater, who can be looking for that child who seems to be a little off that day and can one-on-one invest in them and ask the questions? What happened today? What's happening at home? I think that that is going to be the best solution for if something's happening at home. A lack of support, go to their activities, encourage your leaders to be present in their community, in their space where they are. That shows a level of care that they might not be receiving anywhere else. Can you involve them in your life? This gets tricky because boundaries are important, but can you say to said 16-year-old girl who's not feeling supported at home, hey, I'm going to take my kids to the park. Do you want to meet us there? Like, we could all use some fresh air. Or involve them in some sort of leadership at church. See them in a different way that they might not be seeing at home. And then the next thing we just have is just some resources for you guys. And like I said, there's a million resources out there, and you can feel free to email me and I will give you list upon list upon list of books and videos and people to follow. But these are the main ones that I used for this presentation. There is a book written for children's ministry. It's called Trauma Informed Children's Ministry. It goes over a lot of things that we talked about, but just in more depth, connecting scripture to it and how you do that for small amounts of time, because we really only have them for an hour or two a week. The Body Keeps the Score. This is going to help you guys understand what is happening, not only in kids, teens, but also adults. Like I said before, you might have that volunteer that is like kind of difficult. This is going to help you understand why that person might be difficult and how all of the things leading up to this exact moment our body is holding on to, both for good and for bad. So it's a fascinating read and just helps you understand, I really think, how God created us to be as people. The Whole Brain Child, that talks a lot about trauma and what is exactly happening in the brain of the child. The parts of the brain that may have overdeveloped because of trauma and the parts of the brain that may have underdeveloped because of trauma. And then I linked that Biology Factors article is that QR code. So you guys can take a picture of that or whatever. So yeah, that's pretty much it. What questions do you guys have?
Thanks, Kayla.
Yeah.
You can throw questions in the chat. You can feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, if there's a story or scenario that you're like, this is a huge question mark, I'm not sure how to handle this difficult child. You guys just took in a lot of information too, so you can digest it as you need.
How do you like the wording on like sign up? Like I was thinking of VBS when you're trying to nicely ask like, do you have any like allergies, but also like mental health, like just kind of you need to know, but how do you like nicely ask?
You could say something like, is there something unique about your child that I should know? And most times, parents who have kids who are unique in a way like that know that that's what you're asking. And they might share it and they might not. Honestly, some parents are really open about all the stuff, and some parents hold it a little bit closer to their chest. But I would do something like that. What is unique about your child that you might want us to know?
Thank you.
You can always put in parentheses too after that question, examples of what you're looking for. Like, are they on an IEP at school? Are there certain friends they struggle with? Or, any put it
Impulse
all in, like, a
control.
list of
Yeah.
things, and it triggers a parent's brain that, like, oh, they are on an IEP, and that individualized education plan. So that's when the school and the family works together to create a plan for that child. And so there might be things they learned at school that you can implement at church because of that plan. But that's a great question.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's an important question to ask for every event that you do. I mean, I'm sending a group of kids on a missions trip Saturday. Like, good luck, leaders. Hopefully, you know everything you need to know. But to have that is really, really good.
Yeah. Amanda said, when the difficult child is damaging relationships in the group, what helps rebuild that trust?
So are you trying to rebuild trust with the child or with the group? Because there's two very different situations happening there. I think to rebuild child with the trust is almost, or rebuild trust with the child is almost going to be easier than rebuilding the trust with the group. That could be something that you ask a parent. Can I have some wording that you are okay with us telling their peers of why they might be acting the way that they're acting? And then I would tell the peers. I had a conversation the other day where a teacher at my son's school was like, we've done a really good job at teaching about physical differences with our kids. And so most students, most kids see someone with a physical difference and they don't think about it at all. It's just normal life. But we have not done the same with emotional or biologically diverse people. And so I think that having those conversations with a group of kids too is okay to say, did you know that everyone's brain functions a little bit differently? And that could rebuild trust with the group. Rebuilding trust with a difficult child or a difficult teen, they just want to be seen. They just want to be known. They just want some one-on-one attention. And they want to know that you are for them in one-on-one group and you're for them in a big group environment. So it can get a little bit tricky depending on how big your group is and what the kid's comfortable with and what the parents are comfortable with.
Absolutely. Sammy says, students who get special attention from adults in a group become that kid. If it's happening week after week, how do we not stigmatize the kid who's always getting adult attention because they're self-excluding or being disruptive? If you guys have experiences too, chime in with what has worked for your group, because there's a lot of wisdom in the room. But Kayla, any thoughts on how to both care but not stigmatize that child?
Yeah, I think you could find a peer that might be a little bit more mature in those emotional areas and ask that peer every once in a while. You don't want to steal their experience, but ask that peer to almost engage them or support them or see them. I think that helps them not be that kid and keeps the adult can kind of stand aside and step in when need be. It's a tricky line though, because I feel like the adult interaction, we don't always have enough volunteers to have a one-on-one adult with that kid. But we could have some pretty mature teenagers or older leaders, like a high school student leaning into a middle school student or a high school student leading into a 3-year-old, and they just need that one-on-one. I think using more of a peer will keep them from being that kid.
I think this is a spot too where you can get creative about looking at your program differently as a whole. And so you might have that kid in mind, but there might be other kids that need similar things. And so when you're playing the crazy game, is there a quiet alternative? Do you have earplugs on hand for any kid that might need it? Are there tricks like that that will help that specific kid, but maybe other kids in the group as well?
Yeah. And I think also if you have access to outside, you can provide that as an option too, if they need to fully be away from the noise. Or maybe that's the time that a certain group of kids can take a bathroom break or whatever. I think that that's a great idea, Rebecca, of like reorganizing things.
Heather said, Kayla, I love that you said to invite the Holy Spirit to guide our hearts into how to work with a student today. A good reminder to us when we may get frustrated or we take a step back and lean on the power of the Spirit to lead better. I also love that you said it. And I love that this names the frustration that we feel, because that's so normal. We can be equipped with tools and we can have conversations like this, but in the moment, it's still hard. And so if you're experiencing that with a student, if a student's coming to mind for you, just know that we have all been in that spot and we all know that frustration there.
Yeah.
Seth says, our church has a policy of not having adults alone with one youth. How would you suggest navigating this, but also supporting parents and youth outside of our programmatic time?
I think that you can go to their sports activities. You can go to their plays. Or even, I don't know what your like city's policy is or whatever on bringing lunch to school. I feel like that's all, you're not alone. It's not like you're one-on-one in a car with that child. There's other people around in those situations. So I think that I would navigate it that way. I would go to where they are and also talk to the parent about what the parent's comfortable with. But that way you're not fully alone and you're in a public place. So that child can see that they're being supported in that way, but nothing inappropriate is happening because there's a million people around. I also think when we say one-on-ones, I'm picturing like your large group environment and you have a one-on-one adult with that person, maybe in the corner or kind of away from the crazy game. It doesn't necessarily have to be like you alone seeing a movie with them.
And it might involve like whole friend groups that you're just taking that group of kids to do something.
Yeah.
Amanda.
I did something last night that feels like it's worth sharing with the group. My 6th and 7th graders are having a hard time right now with getting along with one another. And I invited a middle school teacher within the congregation to come and be my second adult that night. And afterwards, she gave me feedback on what I could do differently and what I might not know about the emotional place of this age group and things like that. And like assured me that a lot of what was going on was pretty normal. And it was really affirming and also really instructive on what I can do differently. She said, like instead of having them raise their hands to vote, give them a break to stand up and have them vote by moving to a corner of the room. And then they'll come back. And just that tiny micro amount of movement can help the kids that at that moment needed to move. So I found it really useful to draw on that resource as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Love that.
I think that's one of the things, like we should always be learners. And who can we be learning from? Teachers with these kids every day. I think that was brilliant.
And I think it's good to just experiment with stuff to see, I wonder if this would work with our group and give it a shot. And some things will be great and it will help your challenging kids. And sometimes it won't be great and you just know, and you move on to try something new. But when we start to experiment with these different ideas, we see this might actually really work and become something you incorporate regularly into your programming. Great. Well, are there any other questions before we wrap up this morning? I think this has been a really helpful time. I'm so glad that you have been here with us this morning.
Rebecca can send out my information too, if you guys want to email or whatever. Even if you just want to talk through a problem later, we can definitely do that.
Yeah. And as a reminder, YMCA is here. We offer little to no cost coaching. And so if you have a student that you are like, I don't know what to do, we have trained ministry people that Kayla's one of them that can walk with you through these questions and help you navigate this. We want your church to be a safe place for these kids, a safe place to encounter the love of God. And so any way we can help you do that, we would love to. I just dropped a couple links in the chat. The first one is a survey on your experience today. We love to hear what landed with you, what didn't, what topics are coming up for you. We want to serve you better. And so it really helps us when you take just a minute and fill this out and let us know how we can make these times better, how we can plan differently for the coming year. And the second link is our December webinar. We're talking about ministry management tools. I don't know about you, but I have made many a church bookkeeper very frustrated with my lack of ministry management skills. So if you find yourself dreading submitting receipts or calendar planning or all the forms and the details and all of that, this webinar is for you. Jenny Olson is going to present really practical strategies to get better at this because it is a stewardship thing and we do need to know how to do this, even though for a lot of us, it is not our first love. So please join us next month for that. Registration's open. If you used a code to join us today, that same code will work. And we hope to see you there. Kayla, thank you so much for your time today, for this insight. It's so fun to think of all the students represented by these leaders and how they will be loved even better and know the love of Christ more because of our time together this morning. So